I bet I'm the only rancher in history who got an entire perimeter fence, complete with a state-of-the-art, custom-keyed gate, installed absolutely free of charge by the very people trying to steal my land. Sounds completely bonkers, right? Well, strap yourselves in, because this story isn't just a wild ride, it's a masterclass in how pomposity and unchecked ego can lead to some spectacularly expensive self-owns. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from, and tell me if you've ever had a run-in with an HOA that made you seriously consider taking up hermitage on a deserted island. You're going to want to hear this one. It all started subtly, as these things often do, like a faint, unpleasant smell you can't quite place until it's suddenly overwhelming. My ranch, Oakhaven, has been in my family for 3 generations. It's not one of those mega ranches you see in movies, but it's a sizable spread of rolling hills, ancient oaks, and a creek that snakes its way through the lower pastures. My own slice of paradise. My sanctuary. I'm a private person by nature. My work involves precision, security, and ensuring things stay where they're supposed to. You see, I own a company, Apex Secure Solutions, that designs and manufactures high-security locks. We do everything from custom residential stuff to serious commercial and industrial systems. It's a field that demands attention to detail, and let's just say that transfers pretty well to other areas of life, especially when someone tries to pull a fast one. Adjacent to Oakhaven's eastern border is a relatively new development, Willow Creek Estates, one of those aspirational communities with meticulously manicured lawns and an HOA that seemed to exist primarily to generate newsletters about the appropriate shade of beige for mailbox posts. For years, we coexisted peacefully. Their development plans, which I'd reviewed when they first broke ground, clearly showed a 20-foot wide ecological buffer zone separating their properties from my fence line. A fence line, by the way, that had stood undisputed for over 70 years. This buffer was designated as undevelopable green space, part of their commitment to the county for planning permission. Then came Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She was new blood, elected HOA president on a wave of promises to enhance community prestige and maximize property values. Mrs. Vance was, to put it mildly, a caricature of the power-tripping HOA board member. She drove a pristine, pearl-white Lexus SUV that always seemed to be silently judging lesser vehicles. Her attire was invariably sharp, expensive business suits or tailored sheath dresses, even when she was just pointing at a supposedly non-compliant petunia. She carried an oversized designer handbag like it was a scepter of office, and her expression was permanently set to condescendingly disappointed. I first encountered her reign of terror indirectly, through hushed complaints from a few acquaintances within Willow Creek. Stories of arbitrary fines, draconian rule interpretations, and a general atmosphere of genteel oppression began to circulate. I mostly chuckled, thankful for the sturdy, old barbed wire fence that separated my world from hers. The first direct sign of trouble arrived in my mailbox via certified mail, always a harbinger of something unpleasant. It was a letter, on impressively thick cardstock, embossed with the Willow Creek Estates HOA logo, informing me that a routine survey review had indicated that a significant portion of what I considered my eastern pasture, including the ancient oaks that gave my ranch its name, was, in fact, OA common land. It politely yet firmly requested that I cease all agricultural activities on their property and remove any personal effects within 30 days. I remember reading it, rereading it, and then bursting out laughing. It was patently absurd. The land they were claiming had been actively ranched by my grandfather, my father, and now me for decades. The property lines were clearly demarcated on every survey map the county possessed. My initial thought was that this was some sort of bizarre administrative error, a misaddressed letter perhaps. I decided a calm, rational conversation was in order. I called the HOA number, and after navigating a phone tree clearly designed by someone who hated human interaction, I was put through to Mrs. Vance herself. Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined, crisp, cool, and dripping with thinly veiled impatience. "Mr. Davies," she began, her tone suggesting I was already in imposition. "I trust you received our correspondence regarding the common area boundary adjustment." I explained, politely, that there must be a mistake. I outlined the history of my property, the established fence lines, the county records. Her response was a masterpiece of dismissive arrogance. "Mr. Davies," she said with an audible sigh that I'm sure was meant to convey the burden of dealing with such an uninformed individual, "the previous HOA board was, shall we say, rather lax in its duties. We are merely rectifying past oversights. Our new survey, conducted by a highly reputable firm, is quite clear. Perhaps your records are outdated?" Outdated? My deed was recorded with the county, based on surveys that had stood for nearly a century. Her highly reputable firm was, I suspected, one that told her exactly what she wanted to hear. The conversation went downhill from there. She spoke of community enhancement projects, beautifying the perimeter, and ensuring the security and exclusivity of Willow Creek Estates. It became clear she wasn't interested in facts, only in her expansionist vision. It felt like talking to a brick wall. If a brick wall could wear Chanel and look down its nose at you. My old neighbor, Tom Henderson, a gruff but good-hearted man whose property bordered mine to the north, and who'd seen his share of HOA shenanigans from a different development years ago, just shook his head when I told him. "That Vance woman," he grumbled, spitting tobacco juice with surprising accuracy at a distant thistle. "She's got aspirations, that one. Thinks running that little kingdom of hers is a stepping stone. Heard she's eyeing a run for town council next. She'll railroad anyone who gets in her way. You watch yourself, Alex. People like that don't care about right or wrong. They only care about winning." His words, unfortunately, would prove to be prophetic. Shortly thereafter, the Willow Creek HOA newsletter, a copy of which Tom surreptitiously passed to me, announced grand plans for the Willow Creek Perimeter Beautification and Security Initiative. Phase 1, it declared, involved clearing and reclaiming underutilized HOA common land along the eastern boundary, and the subsequent installation of a handsome, high-security perimeter fence and access gate. There was even a little artist's rendering, a pristine white vinyl fence marching inexorably across what was unmistakably my pasture, culminating in an ornate gate. The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just claiming my land. They were planning to build on it, to fence me out of my own property, using their funds to seize it. The subtle, unpleasant smell had just become a full-blown stench, and I knew this was going to be more than a simple misunderstanding. This was going to be a fight. And if there's one thing my profession has taught me, it's that the best security often comes from understanding your opponent's vulnerabilities and patiently waiting for the right moment to use them. MrsBlank.com. Vance, for all her bluster, had no idea who she was dealing with. She saw a quiet rancher. She didn't see a man whose entire career was built on locks, keys, and the fundamental principles of access and denial. And that, I suspected, was going to be her very expensive mistake. The battle lines were being drawn, not with surveyors' flags, but with arrogance on one side and quiet, methodical preparation on the other. The weeks following that initial, infuriating letter and Mrs. Vance's pronouncements were a whirlwind of barely suppressed rage on my part, and increasingly bold pronouncements from the Willow Creek HOA. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. I prefer logic, facts, and well-laid plans. My first step was to pull out every piece of documentation I had. The original deed to Oakhaven, my grandfather's carefully preserved survey maps, tax records showing consistent payment on the entirety of the property, even old aerial photographs from the county archives that clearly showed my fence line in its current position for decades. Everything was irrefutable. My property line was exactly where I, my father, and my grandfather had always known it to be. The 20-foot buffer zone belonging to Willow Creek was clearly delineated on their own original development plats, entirely separate from my land. Armed with this mountain of evidence, I requested a formal meeting with the HOA board. I wasn't naive enough to think Mrs. Vance would suddenly see reason, but I needed to go through the proper channels to create a clear record of my attempts to resolve this amicably. The meeting, when it finally happened, was a farce. It was held in the Willow Creek Community Clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool. Mrs. Vance presided, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I'll call them Chad and Brenda. Chad, the vice president, was a nervous, fidgety man who nodded vigorously at everything Vance said, a classic enabler. Brenda, the treasurer, looked perpetually uncomfortable and avoided eye contact, occasionally doodling on her notepad. I laid out my case calmly and methodically, presenting copies of my deeds, the official county surveys, and the historical evidence. I pointed to the HOA's own original development plans, highlighting the buffer zone. As you can see, I concluded, the land in question is unequivocally mine. Your proposed fence would be built entirely on my private property. Mrs. Vance listened with an expression of strained patience, as if I were a child explaining a fantastical dream. When I finished, she gave a small, condescending smile. Mr. Davies, she said, her voice smooth as silk, we appreciate you sharing your perspective. However, as I mentioned, our new survey, conducted by the highly respected firm of Edgecombe Associates, clearly indicates a different boundary. Technology evolves, Mr. Davies. Surveying methods become more precise. It seems past demarcations were, regrettably, inaccurate. Edgecombe Associates. I made a mental note to look them up. I suspected, highly respected, meant willing to draw lines wherever the client paid them to. I pressed further. Mrs. Vance, a survey cannot simply discover new land for you that belongs to someone else. My deed is a legal document recorded with the county. Are you suggesting the county records are wrong? Chad chimed in. Well, records can be misinterpreted. Mrs. Vance has been very thorough in ensuring our community's assets are properly identified. He sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Brenda continued her doodling, her silence a testament to her discomfort or, perhaps, her spinelessness. Mrs. Vance then played what she clearly thought was her trump card. Furthermore, Mr. Davies, she announced, our legal counsel has reviewed the matter and concurs with our findings. We are fully within our rights to secure what is, in fact, HOA common property. The perimeter, beautification, and security initiative will proceed as planned. We expect contractors to begin work within the next 2 weeks. She delivered this with an air of finality, as if the matter were closed. Legal counsel? I wondered if their lawyer had actually seen my evidence, or if they'd only been fed Vance's version of reality. The sheer audacity was stunning. They weren't just mistaken. They were willfully blind, pushing forward with a land grab based on a phantom survey and, I suspected, Mrs. Vance's insatiable ego. I left that meeting with a cold knot of anger in my stomach, but also a growing sense of determination. If they wanted to play hardball, so could I. My next call was to my own lawyer, Arthur Jenkins, a seasoned property attorney who had handled my family's legal affairs for years. Arthur was the antithesis of the slick corporate lawyers Vance likely employed. He was old school, meticulous, and had a bulldog tenacity when it came to protecting his clients' rights. I laid out the situation, forwarded him copies of all my documents, and the official communications from the HOA. Arthur listened patiently, occasionally letting out a low whistle. Well, Alex, he said when I'd finished, this Mrs. Vance sounds like a real piece of work. This Edgecombe Associates survey stinks to high heaven. They can't just redraw property lines based on a whim and a hired gun surveyor. Your deed and the county records are paramount. He advised sending a strongly worded cease and desist letter, outlining the legal basis of my ownership and warning them of the consequences of trespassing and damaging my property. We'll put them on formal notice, Alex, Arthur said. If they set 1 foot or 1 fence post on your land after receiving this, they're opening themselves up to a world of legal hurt, including damages and covering all your legal fees. The cease and desist letter was dispatched via certified mail, return receipt requested. It was a masterpiece of legal prose, polite yet utterly uncompromising. It laid out, in excruciating detail, the legal basis for my ownership and the potential liabilities the HOA and its individual board members would face if they proceeded. A few days later, I received the signed return receipt. They had it. There was no way they could claim ignorance now. I almost felt a sliver of hope that perhaps, faced with undeniable legal facts and the threat of a lawsuit, Mrs. Vance might back down. That hope was short-lived. The following week, a team of surveyors, presumably from the esteemed Edgecombe Associates, appeared at the edge of my pasture. They weren't on my land, not yet, but they were driving stakes into the ground along the line they claimed was the boundary, a line that carved a deep crescent into my property, gobbling up nearly 2 acres, including a section of the creek bank and several of those majestic ancient oaks. I watched them from a distance, my blood pressure rising. They were ignoring the cease and desist. They were actively preparing to encroach. Then, the trucks started arriving. Heavy equipment, stacks of white vinyl fencing panels, posts, bags of concrete. A crew of rough-looking contractors began unloading materials on the HOA side of the disputed line, clearly gearing up for a major construction project. The Perimeter Beautification and Security Initiative was apparently moving full steam ahead. Legal warnings be damned. Mrs. Priest Vance herself made an appearance, stepping gingerly from her Lexus in a crisp pantsuit and sensible heels. Sensible for supervising, not for ranch work. Pointing and directing the contractors with an air of regal authority, she even glanced over towards my house, a smug little smile playing on her lips. It was a clear message: I do what I want. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was also, I realized, creating a perfect opportunity. As I watched them unload a particularly large crated item, what looked suspiciously like a heavy-duty automated gate assembly, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of an idea began to sprout in my mind. It was audacious, a long shot perhaps, but if it worked, oh if it worked, it would be beautiful. My company, Apex Secure Solutions, didn't just make standard locks. We specialized in custom, high-security systems. We supplied contractors, developers, and even other security firms. What were the odds, I mused, that a prestigious development like Willow Creek Estates, so concerned with security and exclusivity, would opt for a premium locking system for their brand new statement-making gate? And what if that premium system just happened to be one of ours? The thought, initially a wild spark, began to glow a little brighter. This wasn't just about stopping them anymore. This was about turning their own aggressive, arrogant folly against them in the most ironic way possible. The game, it seemed, was about to get a lot more interesting. The following days were a study in orchestrated chaos along my eastern fence line. The contractors, a motley crew who seemed more interested in finishing quickly than in precision, began their assault. The clang of post-hole diggers, the whine of saws cutting vinyl, and the shouts of the crew foreman became the unwelcome soundtrack to my mornings. I documented everything meticulously. Photographs, videos with timestamps, notes on every vehicle and individual who crossed onto my land. Arthur Jenkins was already preparing the initial filings for an injunction and a lawsuit for trespass and damages, but the legal process, as he warned, could be slow. Mrs. Vance and her HOA were clearly banking on creating facts on the ground, hoping that once the fence was up, it would be too much trouble or too expensive to force them to remove it. They underestimated my patience, and they wildly underestimated my resources, specifically, my intimate knowledge of the very thing they planned to use to secure their new acquisition, the gate lock. As the fence posts marched steadily across my pasture, each one a fresh stab of indignation, I focused my attention on the gate. The crated assembly I'd seen earlier was indeed a heavy-duty sliding gate, the kind designed for controlled access. And on the specification sheet, that one of the contractors carelessly left clinging to the crate during a lunch break, a sheet I may or may not have discreetly photographed with my phone's telephoto lens, was the detail I was hoping for. Under security hardware, it listed Apex Titan Pro Series Automated Gate Lock. My heart gave a little leap. The Titan Pro. That was one of ours. Not just one of ours, but part of our premium line, known for its pick resistance, its robust construction, and its highly controlled keyways. Apex Secure Solutions prided itself on the integrity of its keying systems. For high-security commercial lines like the Titan Pro, key blanks were strictly controlled, and master keying systems were meticulously documented and managed directly by us at headquarters. Resellers and installers could order them keyed alike or keyed differently, but new installations requiring unique key sets, especially for a secure community application, often involved specific cylinder allocations managed by our Special Projects Division to prevent unauthorized duplication. A plan began to solidify, moving from a wild spark to a detailed blueprint in my mind. This wasn't just a lucky break. It was an opportunity forged by their own pretensions. Mrs. Vance wanted high security. She was about to get it, just not in the way she imagined. My first move was a discreet call to Maria, the head of our special projects and custom keying department at Apex. Maria had been with me since the early days of the company. She was brilliant, utterly trustworthy, and knew our systems inside and out. Maria, I said, keeping my voice casual, hypothetical question for you. If a contractor, say a mid-sized development contractor, ordered a Titan Pro gate lock system for a new community entrance, what's our standard procedure for keying if they request a unique, high-security cylinder? Maria, ever efficient, replied, standard order, unique keyway, not part of a larger existing master system? We'd typically assign a fresh cylinder from a new series, generate 2 unique operating keys, and 1 control key for repinning if needed, all serial numbered and logged. The keys ship directly to the designated recipient. Secure courier. We don't release those key codes to anyone but the verified end user or their designated security manager after installation and system sign-off. And, I pressed, if the order came through one of our regional distributors, say Secure Horizons Limited, out of Oak Haven County, would we still manage the core keying data centrally? Secure Horizons Limited was indeed one of our larger distributors in the region, and the likely supplier for the Willow Creek contractors. Absolutely, Maria confirmed. Distributors can facilitate the sale, but for Titan Pro unique keyings, Apex maintains ultimate control over the cylinder records and key generation to ensure security integrity. It's a selling point, remember? Uncompromised key control. I could almost hear the capital letters in her voice. This was perfect. My next step required a bit more finesse. I couldn't just call up Secure Horizons and ask about the Willow Creek order. That would raise red flags. Instead, I waited. I observed the contractors. I noted the project manager for the fencing company, a harried-looking fellow named Dave. One afternoon, as they were packing up, I strolled over, adopting the air of a mildly curious, slightly befuddled landowner. Quite a project you've got going here, I said to Dave, nodding towards the nearly completed fence line, now deep within what was, until a week ago, undeniably my land. Dave, looking tired and covered in dust, just grunted. Yeah, well, the lady wants what the lady wants, he muttered, clearly referring to Mrs. Vance. Say, I continued, feigning innocence, that gate looks pretty serious. What kind of lock does something like that use? Must be pretty special for a fancy place like Willow Creek. Dave, probably happy to talk about something other than digging post holes in the summer heat, actually perked up a bit. Oh yeah, top of the line. It's an Apex Titan Pro. Client specified it. Best you can get, apparently. We're sourcing it through Secure Horizons. They handle all the programming for the access codes too. But the physical lock, that's some serious hardware. Bingo. He'd confirmed the supplier. Now, how to ensure I ended up with the keys, or at least a key. This was the delicate part. I couldn't overtly interfere with the order. But Apex Secure Solutions, my company, had procedures. And sometimes, new product lines or specific high-security batches had unique rollout protocols. I spent that evening on the phone with Maria again, and then with my head of production. We discussed a newly enhanced security feature for the Titan Pro series being selectively beta tested with certain key distributors. This feature involved a special owner's master key set, distinct from the standard operating keys, shipped separately and directly from Apex HQ to the end user for ultimate security assurance and initial system setup verification. It was, of course, complete fabrication, a bureaucratic phantom limb we were grafting onto the Titan Pro ordering process just for this occasion. The beauty of it was its plausibility. Companies do this sort of thing all the time with new tech. The order from Secure Horizons for the Willow Creek Estates Titan Pro gate lock came through our system a few days later, exactly as expected. It was flagged for the Enhanced Security Beta program. A standard set of 2 operating keys would be generated and sent to Secure Horizons for the contractors to install and test the gate. But a separate, uniquely coded master key for that specific lock cylinder, a key that could override any other programming, a key that was essentially the ultimate physical access tool, was discreetly manufactured under my direct supervision. It was coded to a brand new, isolated series, its existence known only to me, Maria, and one trusted technician in our secure assembly lab. This key wasn't going to Secure Horizons. It wasn't going to the contractors. And it certainly wasn't going to Mrs. Eleanor Vance. This key, carefully packaged in a plain, unassuming envelope, was delivered by bonded courier directly to a P.O. Box 1 controlled. The fence continued its relentless march. It was now fully enclosing the 2 acres of my pasture land. The posts were set, the vinyl panels gleaming white and offensively new against the backdrop of my rustic, weathered oak haven. The gate itself, a surprisingly ornate monstrosity of white powder-coated aluminum, was installed. I watched them fit the Apex Titan Pro lock housing, wire up the automated opener, and test it with a keypad. Mrs. Vance made several site visits, beaming with proprietary pride, occasionally directing the placement of a decorative finial with the focused intensity of a field marshal planning a campaign. She even had a small, tasteful bronze plaque prepared, Willow Creek Estates, private common area, access restricted. It was galling. It was infuriating. And it was all going according to my burgeoning, deliciously ironic plan. The trap wasn't just set. The bait, a brand new high-security fence and gate paid for entirely by the HOA, was now firmly in place. All I had to do was wait for them to officially lock me out. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a simmering blend of righteous anger and wicked delight. The day the fence was officially completed was marked by a small, self-congratulatory ceremony orchestrated by Mrs. Vance. She'd invited the Willow Creek Estates residents to witness the securing of their new common area. A small crowd gathered on their side of the gleaming white fence, sipping lemonade from plastic cups, while Mrs. Vance, resplendent in a power blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, gave a short, triumphant speech. I watched from my porch, a good 100 yards away, through a pair of powerful binoculars. Today, she proclaimed, her voice amplified by a small portable speaker, marks a new era for Willow Creek Estates, an era of enhanced beauty, improved security, and clearly defined boundaries that protect our property values and our exclusive way of life. She gestured dramatically towards the new fence, which snaked across what was, until very recently, my land. This magnificent new perimeter, she continued, and this state-of-the-art security gate ensure that our common area remains a tranquil and secure amenity for Willow Creek residents only. There was polite applause. Chad, the VP, stood beside her, beaming like a proud puppy. Brenda, the treasurer, looked as if she might be physically ill, but she clapped along weakly. The contractors, having received their final payment, had already packed up and left. The new gate, with its freshly installed Apex Titan Pro lock, stood as a gleaming white barrier between me and my own pasture, my oaks, my creek. After her speech, Mrs. Vance, with a flourish, produced a small silver key. This, I surmised, was one of the two standard operating keys the contractors had left with the HOA. She inserted it into the lock's manual override cylinder, just to demonstrate, I imagine, then dramatically turned it. With a satisfying clunk, the mechanism engaged. She then used a remote to slide the gate open a few feet, then closed again, a demonstration of its automated function. "Secure," she announced brightly. "Exclusively ours." The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. A few days passed. I let them savor their victory. I continued my normal ranch routine, pointedly ignoring the new, illegal edifice. I knew the next move would have to come from them. Sure enough, it arrived in the form of another certified letter. This one was even more imperious than the first. It formally notified me that the HOA Common Area Reclamation Project was complete, and that any attempt on my part to access, use, or tamper with the new perimeter fence and security gate would be considered trespassing and would result in immediate legal action and prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. It was signed, with a flourish, by Eleanor Vance, President, Willow Creek Estates HOA. It was, essentially, a formal declaration that they had stolen my land and were now forbidding me from setting foot on it. Perfect. This was the official act of ousting I needed. Arthur Jenkins, my lawyer, was delighted. "This is gold, Alex, pure gold," he chuckled when I read it to him. "They've not only trespassed, built an illegal structure on your land, but they're now actively, and in writing, denying you access to your own property. The damages just keep mounting for them." The time had come. The next morning, I decided, was day. Or perhaps K-Day for key. I chose mid-morning, when I knew Mrs. Vance often held her little court at the HOA clubhouse, visible from the gate. I didn't call ahead. I didn't bring a lawyer or a sheriff. I just brought myself, my old ranch truck, and a very special key resting in my pocket. As I rumbled down my long driveway towards the new gate, I saw her pearl-white Lexus parked near the clubhouse. Excellent. She was present. I pulled up to the gate. It was closed, of course. The shiny bronze plaque gleamed its officious message: "Access restricted." I got out of my truck, calmly walked to the pedestrian access panel next to the main vehicle gate, and took out the key. Not just any key. The key. The one Apex Secure Solutions had specially minted for this very lock. The one whose existence was a carefully guarded secret. It slid into the Titan Pro cylinder with the smooth, satisfying precision that was a hallmark of our craftsmanship. A quarter turn, a soft click, and the manual override disengaged the automated system. I then pressed the open button on the gate's control panel. With a quiet whir, the massive white gate began to slide open, granting me access to my land. I drove my truck through, parked it just inside the fence line on my side, and got out, leaving the gate open. Then, I simply began to walk my property line, inspecting the new fence from my side. It didn't take long for the commotion to start. I heard a shriek, unmistakably Mrs. Vance, from the direction of the clubhouse. Soon, she was power-walking towards me, Chad scurrying in her wake, her face a mask of outrage. "Mr. Davies!" she screeched, her voice several decibels higher than her usual controlled purr. "What do you think you are doing? This is private HOA property. You are trespassing. I just sent you a letter." She was practically vibrating with fury. Chad, predictably, echoed, "Yeah, trespassing. Big trouble." I stopped my leisurely stroll and turned to face them, maintaining a perfectly calm demeanor. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance, Chad," I said pleasantly. "Actually, this is my property, and you've built a rather expensive fence on it. Quite a handsome fence, I must say, though the color is perhaps a tad suburban for my taste." Mrs. Vance's jaw dropped. How did you open that gate?" she sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the still-open portal. "That is a high-security lock. It's keyed only for the HOA." "Ah, the lock," I said, allowing myself a small smile. "Yes, an Apex Titan Pro. Excellent choice. Very secure. In fact, my company, Apex Secure Solutions, manufactured it." I paused for effect, letting that sink in. The color drained from Mrs. Vance's face. Chad looked utterly bewildered, his mouth hanging open. Your company? She stammered, the fight visibly seeping out of her. Indeed, I continued, enjoying this perhaps a little too much. And as the manufacturer, and given the rather unique circumstances of this installation on what is demonstrably my land, I took the liberty of ensuring I had a key. After all, one should always be able to access one's own property, don't you think? I jiggled the special Apex key in my hand. It's a rather exclusive key. In fact, for this particular lock, I believe it's the only one of its kind that isn't one of the two standard operating keys you possess. The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Vance stared at the key, then at my face, then back at the key. The cogs were turning, slowly and painfully, in her mind. The implications were dawning. She'd used HOA funds to build a fence, on my land, with a lock made by my company, a lock to which I held the master key. She hadn't just failed to steal my land, she'd inadvertently paid to fence it for me. You can't, she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. But our survey, our lawyer, your survey, Mrs. Vance, I said, my tone hardening slightly, is a work of fiction. Your lawyer, if he advised you to proceed after receiving my attorney's cease and desist letter and seeing my evidence, is incompetent. You have committed trespass, property damage, and are attempting illegal exclusion. And you've done it all with HOA members' money. Chad had gone pale. He looked like he was about to faint. But the fence, he squeaked. What about the fence? Yes, Chad, what about the fence? I replied. It's a very nice fence, and it's on my land, which, according to established legal precedent regarding fixtures and improvements made without the landowner's consent, means it's now my fence. I gave them my most benevolent smile. So on behalf of Oakhaven Ranch, I'd like to thank Willow Creek Estates for their generous donation of a brand new, high-security perimeter fence and automated gate. It's much appreciated. Though I might repaint it green at some point, Mrs. Vance looked like she was going to explode. Her face went from pale to blotchy red. Words failed her. She just stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a beached fish. It was, I have to admit, deeply satisfying to witness. The Queen of Willow Creek Estates, dethroned by a simple piece of metal, a product of her own supposed superior security choice, now wielded by the very person she sought to dispossess. The trap hadn't just been sprung, it had snapped shut with a resounding, and for her, very costly, clang. The sheer, unadulterated shock on her face was a picture I'd treasure for years to come. The suburban warfare, as Tom Henderson might have called it, had just reached its climax, and the victor was not who Mrs. Eleanor Vance had expected. The immediate aftermath of the gate reveal was, to put it mildly, chaotic for Mrs. Vance and the Willow Creek HOA. While she stood there, sputtering and incoherent, I calmly informed her that my lawyer, Arthur Jenkins, would be in touch with the HOA's legal counsel very shortly to discuss the modalities of this unintended gift and the not-so-small matter of damages for the weeks of trespass and harassment. I then got back in my truck, drove deeper into my pasture to make a point of inspecting my newly acquired fence from various angles, and then, using my key, I closed and locked the gate behind me when I left that section of the ranch later in the day. I made sure to wave cheerfully at a few bewildered Willow Creek residents who were drawn by the earlier commotion. Mrs. Vance, I later heard from Tom, who had an uncanny network of informants within Willow Creek, threw an epic tantrum in the HOA clubhouse, blaming the contractors, blaming Edgecombe, Associates, blaming Chad, blaming Brenda, blaming everyone but herself. The news of how their HOA president had managed to spend a considerable chunk of their reserve funds to build a fence for the neighboring rancher, a rancher she was actively trying to sue, spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The exclusive high-security gate, now accessible only to me with its true master key, became a symbol of her hubris and incompetence. Arthur Jenkins, true to his word, contacted the HOA's lawyer that very afternoon. The conversation, as Arthur recounted it to me with considerable amusement, was rather one-sided. The HOA's lawyer, a Mr. Finch, initially tried to bluster, talking about their valid survey and HOA rights. Arthur patiently listened, then calmly laid out the irrefutable evidence: our deeds, the county records, the historical data, their own original development plats showing the buffer zone, the ignored cease and desist letter, and now, the pièce de résistance, photographic and video evidence of their trespass, the construction of the fence entirely on my property, and Mrs. Vance's own written declaration attempting to bar me from my land. Then Arthur dropped the bombshell about the lock. "And just so we're clear, Mr. Finch," Arthur said, his voice laced with dry amusement, "the gate they installed? The very expensive, high-security Apex Titan Pro lock? My client's company manufactured it. He holds the overriding master key. So, not only have your clients gifted him a fence, they've ensured he's the only one who can truly control access to it. It's quite the predicament, wouldn't you say?" Mr. Finch, according to Arthur, went very quiet for a long moment. The implications were stark. The HOA could sue me to try and reclaim the fence, but they'd lose, as it was a fixture illegally placed on my land. They could try to demand access, but they had no legal right. They could try to remove the fence, but that would mean trespassing again and incurring more costs. Plus, they'd have to destroy what they'd just paid for. They were, in legal terms, royally snookered. The HOA board meeting that followed must have been a spectacle. Tom heard whispers of shouting, accusations, and near tears. Brenda, the treasurer, apparently found her voice and demanded to know how much of the HOA's reserve fund had been poured into this debacle. Chad, the VP, allegedly tried to distance himself from Vance, claiming he had voiced concerns, which no one remembered. Mrs. Vance, however, was reportedly defiant, insisting she had acted in the HOA's best interests. Her defiance didn't last long. A significant contingent of Willow Creek homeowners, now fully aware of how their money had been squandered and their HOA made a laughingstock, began organizing. A petition circulated calling for a special meeting to discuss Mrs. Vance's removal. The Perimeter Beautification and Security Initiative had become the Vance Folly Fence. The HOA's lawyer, Mr. Ploscom Finch, clearly advised them they had no legal leg to stand on regarding the fence or the land. Their only viable option was to cut their losses and try to negotiate a settlement regarding the damages I was claiming for the trespass and the disruption. Arthur and I weren't looking to be punitive beyond reason, but we certainly weren't going to let them off scot-tangent-free for the stress and aggravation, not to mention the blatant attempt to steal my land. We calculated a reasonable sum to cover my legal fees, the cost of my time, and a nominal amount for the period my land was effectively seized. The negotiation was swift. The HOA, now under immense pressure from its residents and facing a losing legal battle, agreed to our terms. They issued a formal written apology for the boundary misunderstanding and the unauthorized construction. They paid the settlement amount promptly. And, most satisfyingly, they had to officially acknowledge, in writing, that the fence and gate, located entirely on my property, were indeed my property. I had a brand new, very expensive, high-security fence, fully paid for by the people who tried to cheat me. As for Mrs. Eleanor Vance, her reign as HOA president came to an ignominious end. At the special meeting, she was voted out of office by an overwhelming margin. The last I heard, she'd put her house in Willow Creek Estates up for sale. Her pearl-white Lexus SUV was seen making fewer and fewer imperious journeys around the neighborhood. Chad, the enabling VP, also resigned from the board shortly thereafter, citing personal reasons. Brenda, surprisingly, was elected as the interim president, tasked with restoring some fiscal sanity and common sense to the HOA. She even called me personally to apologize again, sounding genuinely contrite. The new HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the Vance era, became remarkably respectful of property lines and good neighborly conduct. The artist's rendering of the handsome, high-security perimeter fence that had once graced their newsletter was quietly removed from their website. The bronze plaque on the gate, Willow Creek Estates, private common area, access restricted, was also taken down, at my polite but firm request. After all, it was now my gate, leading to my land. I did consider repainting the fence a more rustic green, as I'd cheekily suggested to Mrs. Vance, but in the end, I decided to leave it white. It stood as a gleaming, highly visible monument to her folly, a constant reminder to anyone in Willow Creek Estates who might entertain similar notions of grandeur and overreach. And every time I used my special apex key to open my gate, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just about the free fence, though that was a pretty sweet bonus. It was about the principle. It was about a bully, so confident in her power and her presumed superiority, getting spectacularly outmaneuvered by patience, planning, and a deep understanding of how locks and keys actually work. My ranch, Oakhaven, remained intact, its boundaries secure, its ancient oak safe. And I had a fantastic story to tell, a story that proves sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys, especially the ones who make the locks, get to lock out the bad guys for good. So, what's the craziest HOA story you've ever encountered? Let me know in the comments. I'm sure there are some wild ones out there. And if you enjoyed this little tale of suburban justice, be sure to like and subscribe, because you never know what kind of overreach I might have to deal with next.